Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. I'm Emily, and I'm so excited to have you here today.
And I'm William. In today's video, we'll be exploring the fascinating differences between British and American English.
Whether you're a language enthusiast or just curious, this is going to be a fun and informative conversation.
So grab a cup of tea or coffee and let's dive right into it.
One of the first things I noticed is how certain words are spelled differently, like color in American English and color in British English.
Yes, and the same goes for words like theater in American English, which becomes theater in British English.
The pronunciation can be quite distinct too, like how Americans say schedule with the SK sound, while the British use the sh sound.
Exactly. And there's also the matter of stress on syllables, such as advertisement, which sounds different in each variant.
Then we have vocabulary differences, like elevator in American English versus lift in British English.
Yes, and apartment in American English is flat in British English, which often confuses learners.
Don't forget truck and lorry, which always makes me smile when I hear the British version.
And Americans say vacation, while the British prefer holiday, which can lead to amusing misunderstandings.
Another funny one is sneakers in American English, which is trainers in British English.
That's true, and what about chips? In American English, it means crisps in British English.
And the British use chips for what Americans call French fries, which can lead to hilarious mix-ups.
Speaking of food, Americans say cookie, but the British use biscuit for the same thing.
Another difference is in transportation terms, like subway in American English and underground in British English.
Yes, and gasoline in the US is simply petrol in the UK, which I find quite straightforward.
Oh, and don't forget how Americans say line, but the British say queue when waiting for something.
Exactly, and I think the British version sounds a bit more formal in comparison.
Even when it comes to daily routines, Americans say bathroom, but the British say loo or toilet.
True, and the British might also use flatmate instead of roommate, which can be confusing at first.
And let's not forget idiomatic expressions, like how Americans say it's raining cats and dogs, while the British might prefer it's tipping it down.
Yes, idioms can be tricky, especially when some are unique to each variant, making conversations interesting.
Even basic things like telling time differ, like Americans saying 10 after 5 versus the British 10 past 5.
Yes, and I've also noticed Americans say faucet, while the British say tap for the same object.
Even clothing has differences, like sweater in American English and jumper in British English.
Don't forget pants in American English, which actually means trousers in British English.
It's fascinating how these differences reflect cultural nuances between the two regions.
Absolutely, and it's a reminder that language evolves based on the needs and habits of its speakers.
Even the use of Z in American spellings versus S in British spellings is an intriguing example.
Yes, like realize in American English versus realize in British English, small but noticeable.
Another fun one is fall for the American season name, which the British call autumn.
That's true, and these subtle differences make learning English so much more interesting.
Another word difference is trash in American English, which is commonly referred to as rubbish in British English.
Yes, and Americans say sidewalk, but the British prefer pavement when talking about pedestrian paths.
I've also heard Americans say cell phone, whereas the British usually call it a mobile phone.
And there's flashlight in American English, which becomes torch in British English. Quite the contrast.
Even education terms differ, like grade in American schools versus year in British schools.
Yes, and Americans use principal for the head of a school, while the British say headmaster or head teacher.
One interesting difference is in sports, like how soccer in American English is football in British English.
True, and cricket, which is popular in Britain, doesn't even have a significant presence in the US.
Also, Americans say eraser, but the British call it a rubber, which can sometimes lead to funny misunderstandings.
And in the workplace, Americans say resume, while the British often use CV for the same document.
When talking about money, Americans say bills for paper currency, while the British use the term notes.
Yes, and coins can differ too, like penny in British English versus cent in American English.
Another unique difference is in driving terms like truck in American English, which is lorry in British English.
That's true, and traffic-related words like highway in American English are often motorway in British English.
The British also say car park instead of parking lot, which sounds quite different.
And they use roundabout instead of traffic circle, which I think sounds more elegant.
Even home-related terms vary, like yard in American English, which is garden in British English.
Yes, and Americans might say closet, while the British say wardrobe for the same furniture piece.
And instead of vacuum cleaner, the British often say hoover, which sounds quite regional.
These differences remind us how language reflects cultural identity and regional preferences.
It's interesting how British English uses post for mail, while Americans just say mail.
And they use postbox instead of mailbox, which always amuses me for some reason.
Then there are phrases like fancy dress in British English, which Americans call costume party.
Yes, and movie in American English becomes film in British English, which feels more formal. That's true, and let's not forget about measuring systems, like pounds versus stones in weight.
All these differences make English rich and versatile, offering endless opportunities to learn.
Absolutely, and embracing these nuances helps us better understand diverse cultures and people.
I agree, and exploring these differences can also be a lot of fun in conversations like this.
Yes, and it's a reminder of how language connects us while celebrating our unique ways of expression.
If you enjoyed our discussion and learned something new, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more engaging content.
And don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.